Hello, you are on the Ruslan Belov channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine as of July 12, 2025. A large number of events took place today, and before we begin, I sincerely ask you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It helps the channel grow. Thank you to everyone who has subscribed. There are some very interesting updates today, so let's begin with the Sumy section of the front. Fighting continues both near the settlement of Kondratovka and in the area of Yanukovka. As for Kondratovka, we can see that possibly in the early days of the Ukrainian counter-offensive, the armed forces of Ukraine managed to slightly improve their positions and possibly placed Kondratovka in a semi-encirclement or pincer movement. However, the Ukrainian side failed to develop this success further. And now it seems the Russian Federation, after stabilizing the situation around the settlement, has begun counterattacking, pushing Ukrainian units back to their original positions. Kondratovka is under firm control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Next, we move to Yanukovka. For the first time, perhaps since the start of hostilities and after quite a long break, reports are emerging that the Ukrainian side has not only abandoned the northern part of Yanukovka, but is also retreating from the southern part. It is reported that throughout the past night, Russian forces were clearing the settlement, and several sources and channels expected that the Ministry of Defense might confirm the full clearing of the settlement today, or that footage would emerge showing Russian soldiers raising flags in different parts of the town. However, no such confirmation or footage was released today. We will have to wait a few more days. There might be important updates soon. There is also information that Russian units have cleared part of the forested area near the settlement of Sadki. However, this forested area has been marked in Russian control several times before, only for the markings to be reverted later. The first such markings came during the initial wave of the Sumy offensive, when it was just gaining momentum. At the time, this may have been more speculative, but now the updated markings seem to be based on more reliable sources and commentary. Let's now move to the Kharkiv section of the front. Today, very interesting reports are coming from the northeastern area. A few days ago, Russian forces reportedly cleared the settlement of Myrnohrad. To be exact, this information was published on July 3rd. At the time, it raised questions. Was this the opening of a new front by the Russian army, aimed at advancing in the northeastern part of the Kharkiv region? Or was it simply a media maneuver ahead of a possible third round of negotiations or some other major event? Following July 3rd, the situation seemed to stabilize, and no further updates came from that area. Many cartographers and experts concluded that it was probably just a media move. But today, Ukrainian sources published new footage of objective control. In this video, we see a counterattack by Ukraine's 3rd Independent Tank Brigade. Here we observe Ukrainian tanks firing at close range into a tree line, essentially flattening it as they pass by. This episode was geolocated. Ukrainian equipment was passing through this specific location, and the strikes were directed at the adjacent tree line. Based on this footage, we can conclude that Russian forces have indeed improved their positions and are now close to the settlement of Khotin. This is how the map looked yesterday, at the end of July 11, 2025. Today, updated map markings are being applied. From this footage, we can conclude that the assault on Myrnohrad was not just a media move. The Russian army is continuing its offensive. And at the moment, according to objective control footage, Russian troops are now concentrated around Khotin, which is being regularly shelled, particularly its outskirts. This appears to be preparation for a potential storming. So the Kharkiv offensive continues. Now we move on to the Kupiansk section of the front. We begin with the central part, where fierce battles are taking place along the Boyovka-Myrnohrad line. Active combat is occurring around Borisivska-Andreevka, roughly halfway between the settlements of Lozovaya and Novopotonovka. The Russian army has entrenched itself at several strongpoints located between these villages and is now attempting to advance. This attack could allow Russian forces to finally resolve the situation on the Boguslavka axis, specifically concerning the settlements of Boguslavka, Zagrizovo, and Novokrugliakovka. By advancing along the strongpoints we just mentioned, the Russian army could break into the rear of the Ukrainian formations positioned in Boguslavka, potentially encircling them or forcing them to retreat. In essence, this is a battle for the second line of defense. Russian forces are showing very active progress here. Just yesterday, updated control zone markings were made based on objective control footage released by the Russian side. In these clips, we saw Russian assault troops clearing another strongpoint. Today, we received footage indicating a slight expansion of the control zone. The offensive here is clearly continuing. At the same time, Russian forces are actively advancing on the Lyman axis. The general picture is beginning to emerge. We can see that the Russian army is gradually moving toward the settlement of Chandrigalovaya and is also trying to encircle the town of Kolodyazy, where the front line has largely stalled. Initially, the Russian army made an active push here, but later stalled on the outskirts of Kolodyazy. Now we see that Russian troops are attempting to bypass it from the direction of Zelenaya Dolina, advancing toward the settlement of Stavki. Stavki serves as the main supply route for the Ukrainian forces stationed in Kolodyazy. If the Russian army manages to further reduce the distance to this supply point, the Ukrainian grouping risks being surrounded. In the near future, we can expect a possible localized breakthrough of the front line in this area. At the same time, Russian forces are approaching Chandrigalovaya, a large settlement that could serve as a staging ground for Russian units to push further west toward places like Yarovaya, Novoselovka, Alexandrovka, and other towns in the Oskol direction. Now we turn to the Constantinovka sector of the front. Active fighting continues here. The Russian army is currently focused on the central area and northward along the Seversky-Donetsk-Donbass Canal. There are reports of minor adjustments. Several strongpoints have come under Russian control, and FPV drones are being actively used. Overall, this is the usual flow of fighting without any major breakthroughs. The main developments in this area are once again unfolding along the Kleban-Baik direction. After a long operational pause, Russian forces resumed movement about 2 days ago. Currently, Russian units are concentrated in the southeastern part of the Kleban-Baik reservoir, specifically along the railroad and the Krivoy Torets River. Let me remind you, there are still several settlements under Ukrainian control here. These include the area around Shcherbinovka, which forms a sort of first semi-encirclement, the vicinity of Novospaskaya, where another partial encirclement is developing, and of course the small agglomeration of Katerinovka, Kleban-Baik. These are the three frontline sectors where the Russian army is currently attempting to advance. Several positions and minor encirclements have already been formed in these areas. According to the latest data, Russian forces advanced from the H-20 highway in the direction of Katerinovka. In fact, the last tree lines before Katerinovka have come under the control of Russian units. This indicates that possibly during the upcoming night, between July 12th and 13th, the Russian army may attempt to enter the southwestern outskirts of Katerinovka, which would severely worsen the situation for Ukrainian units located in both the southeastern and southwestern pockets, where Russian troops are also reportedly advancing, according to neutral cartographers. The Russian army is trying to wedge itself between the river and the railway line to split Novospaskaya and Shcherbinovka into two separate pockets. There are also reports of Russian forces beginning to move from Toretsk towards Shcherbinovka. It appears we should expect intense fighting in this area soon. Some dramatic footage is likely to emerge from here. The goal for the Russian units is simple: to cut off this salient, straighten the front line, and shift focus once again to Yablonovka, where fighting continues, this time in its central part. Some cartographers have adjusted their maps, adding newly marked forest belts under Russian control. However, this part of the front is likely unstable and, at the very least, static. It appears to be a brutal head-on battle. Next, we move to the H-32 highway and the village of Novaya Ekonomichnaya. This is the eastern flank of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. This area is currently generating the biggest headlines, confirmed by geolocations and various experts. The map you see now reflects the situation as of July 12, 2025. Yesterday, Russian troops were positioned significantly further south, and much of the area, especially around Koptyevo, was still considered contested. Today, major map updates are being made. Russian forces have advanced north along tree lines and strongpoints toward the settlements of Mayak, Pankovka, and Volodymyrovka. Objective control footage published by the Ukrainian side shows FPV drones striking Russian assault troops moving in pairs through tree belts, attempting to expand the control zone. Additionally, pro-Ukrainian cartographers are expressing alarm over the situation near Novotoretskoye, Boyovka, and Fedorovka. A significant recoloring of the map has occurred here, and according to Ukrainian sources, Russian troops now control at least 25% of Novotoretskoye. There is no confirmed objective control footage yet showing such a breakthrough of Ukrainian defensive lines by Russian troops. However, even more interesting information is coming from west of Novotoretskoye. As you can see, pro-Ukrainian cartographers have expanded the grey zone. According to these updates, fighting is now taking place on the western outskirts of Fedorovka, and Russian troops are engaged in combat within Boyovka itself. If we summarize what pro-Ukrainian experts have published, Russian forces are now operating actively inside this pocket. This is essentially a full-fledged bridgehead, and not just a bridgehead, but a deep wedge into Ukrainian defensive positions within the broader Donbass arc between the Pokrovsk and Constantinovka agglomerations. The main supply and logistics routes between these two zones pass through this territory. This area is already under the full control of the Russian armed forces. Strikes are being carried out around the clock by drones, artillery, and heavy FAB bombs. The situation is deteriorating, as acknowledged not only by pro-Russian analysts, but even some Ukrainian sources as well. Now we move to the Dnipropetrovsk and southern Donetsk directions, where the Russian army is demonstrating the highest pace of advance. The map today shows significant recolorings. Let's go in order. According to objective control footage, Russian forces have entered the western and northwestern outskirts of Novokatskoye. This is confirmed by videos published by the Ukrainian side. In the footage, we can see Ukrainian drones targeting Russian assault units already positioned in the western part of the town. In one clip, 2 Russian troops enter a building, which is then hit by a drone strike. All episodes were geolocated to the western and northwestern parts of the settlement. This suggests that Russian troops deliberately entered the western area to cut off Novokatskoye from Zeleny Gai. As of now, Ukrainian units trapped in this pocket may already be semi-encircled. The Ukrainian command and troops on the ground are facing a choice: withdraw while they still can or stay, likely for good. Moreover, some pro-Russian analysts reported on the morning of July 12th that the settlement of Grushkovo may also have come under Russian control. It's clear that Ukrainian forces were unable to stabilize the front here. The tempo of Russian operations in this area is the highest along the entire contact line. Reports also confirm that the settlement of Myrnohrad has been cleared. It has already been fully recolored on the maps, a move partially corroborated even by pro-Ukrainian cartographers. Ukrainian forces may still hold a few farm areas in the southwestern corner. Given this situation, it appears likely that Ukrainian forces will begin retreating soon. Some pro-Russian cartographers have already fully colored in this pocket as Russian-controlled, claiming that Ukrainian forces have withdrawn toward Voskresenka and Alexandrogorod. Regarding Voskresenka, a significant amount of objective control footage shows Russian artillery and FPV drones leveling the settlement, indicating that artillery preparation for an assault may already be underway. In the next couple of days, we might see the first confirmed footage from this village. Some Russian analysts have already partially marked Voskresenka as under Russian control. The front line here has essentially collapsed. Russian troops continue pushing northwest, and overall, a very intriguing situation is emerging, which we'll discuss in 5 minutes. Now we move to the Zaporizhia front, where the Russian army is also actively advancing. Russian units have improved their positions in and around the settlements of Plavny, Verkhnekamenskaya, and Kamenskaya. We can observe Ukrainian FPV drone strikes and explosive drops targeting Russian frontline positions. This footage has been geolocated, which is why the Ukrainian side targeted these buildings. Based on the video, a significant update was made to the map. The previously grey zone, which various sources had already considered under Russian control, has now been fully colored in as such. The offensive continues. Currently, Russian aviation and artillery are targeting the next Ukrainian defensive line running through Novodmitrievka, then Polpavlovka, Lukyanovka, and Stepnogorsk. The first line of defense in this sector has collapsed, and Russian troops are now preparing to engage the next line. Moreover, if we examine the movements in this direction, it becomes clear that the Russian objective is broader than just advancing toward Zaporizhia. It appears the Russian army may be planning to strike northeast toward Pokrovsk, as Russian troops are also advancing in that direction from Kurakovo and Velika Novosilka on the northwestern axis. So it's quite possible that the most intense battles of the upcoming fall campaign of 2025 will unfold over this Pokrovsk-Gulyai-Pol-Orekhiv pocket. And that's all for now, dear friends. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and take care.